AEW Dynamite from Wednesday, November 13th in Bridgeport, Connecticut, actually. Not too far from where I am, probably about 45 minutes to an hour, probably closer to 45 minutes. The last and only time I have been to an AEW show in Bridgeport at that arena, the Total Mortgage Arena, whatever it's called now. It used to be the old Sound Tigers Arena. I think they still play there. I could be mistaken. But the first and last and only AEW show I've been to in that building was 2.5 years ago, a February 2022 edition of Dynamite. I think that was the first time they ever came to Connecticut, actually. I had been to a couple Dynamites before that, in Boston, which were fun, but they came to Connecticut in 2022, and it was a really fun show. That was in the middle of like the Jericho Eddie Kingston program, and that was back when it was still like a really, really fun feud. They were doing Punk and MJF at that point. That was a great segment. I remember that was the whole MJF promo where he kind of like broke down crying, talking about his past. That happened on that Bridgeport Dynamite 2.5 years ago. They had a tag team battle royal. I think Buddy Matthews debuted on that show, I'm pretty sure. It was a pretty fun show. Last night's show in Bridgeport, the November 13th, 2024 edition, was anything but. This was a fucking bore of a show. It was a fine show for what it was, but more so the crowd reaction. I remember, and I was there at that point, so it may have come across differently on TV. The crowd reaction in person, that first Dynamite I went to in Bridgeport 2.5 years ago, was, from what I can recall, a lot louder. They were in Bridgeport again like 6 months later for another Dynamite. I did not go to that one. That was after the whole Brawl Out thing. The Dynamite product at that point wasn't really overly exciting. It was probably more interesting then than it is now, honestly. But I still didn't really opt to go to that one. I think I went to SmackDown like 2 days later. It would have been a lot. And I'll be going to a lot of shows coming up soon anyway, so I'm thinking, as far as this Dynamite goes, no thanks. And I was just at Collision, actually, in Springfield, Mass. 2 months ago. That was a fine show. It was Collision, but it was fine for what it was. Even that, going to that show in person was more enjoyable than whatever that show was last night. And the effort was there. I think they've done a decent job of coming together, of coming up with a nice card on paper for Full Gear. On paper, I think it's a pretty strong show. I think Moxley and Orange Cassidy, as they proved last year, Full Gear, and at All Out last year, they're going to have a really good match for the AEW World Championship. We're going to be getting Mercedes Moné and Chris Statlander for the TBS Championship. I don't know if Mariah May is defending on that show. I know she's defending, I think, again on Saturday, actually, this Saturday on Collision, against Anna Jay for the AEW Women's World Championship. They might do her and Mina Shirakawa, but that would have to come together pretty quickly considering Mina had just come back. She's just returning to TV now, so probably not. But my point is that they're doing a pretty strong lineup for that show on Full Gear next Saturday. I'll have my full predictions of the pay-per-view here in the show next week, most likely. But that show last night, that crowd did not give a fuck. And I think their first mistake, the company's first mistake was running that building to begin with. I mean, they definitely had a higher attendance. Without even looking at the numbers, I can tell you they did a better number 2.5 years ago than they did for this show last night. It's not like a big arena by any means. I'm sure it's smaller than the Hartford Arena, the XL Center. They had run that only once, about a year ago, in the summer of 2023, for a Collision. One of the first few Collisions they had done. That was a really fun show. That had a great crowd, I thought. The Bridgeport crowds, even for WWE, are typically terrible. But, in the Bridgeport area itself is a fucking dump. Compared to Hartford, compared to Mohegan Sun, which they also go to in Uncasville, Connecticut. That's a great arena. Free parking, too, which is nice. But the actual area itself isn't bad. Even Hartford, which isn't a great area, is a better and easier area to get to, better parking situation. Bridgeport is just an absolute fucking dump. If you live closer to like the New York area and it's right off the highway, I mean, yeah, it's convenient in that respect, but the parking is always a disaster. It takes you a million years to get in there, get out of there, at least from my own experience. Maybe I just don't know how to drive, I guess, but from my own experiences, which there are many, in going there, it has always been awful. So that was my first indicator, like, I'm not going to Dynamite in Bridgeport, but after watching the show, I'm even more glad I was not there. This was a pretty ho-hum show, but like the aura around the product right now is just at an all-time low. And it's amazing too, because I know they're going to go out there next weekend with Full Gear and have a great show. Wrestle Dream was really good. All In especially, but All In and All Out were both great shows. Forbidden Door was a really good show. Double or Nothing this year was a really good show. The pay-per-views are consistently great. They really haven't had a bad pay-per-view all year, and they've had quite a few, dating back to Revolution in March. I think that was the first one of 2024 for AEW. But yeah, just when you look at this card coming up, it has potential. And the build has been fine. Like, they've confirmed most of the card well in advance. The pay-per-view's not for another, 2 weeks. I think, well, it's next Saturday, so really it's in, 9 days. 9 days! But, the build, as far as, the energy around these shows, is just not fucking good. They had that one really good show that I talked about 2 weeks ago, the Fright Night edition, the Halloween week episode. That was really, really good. Almost every other show they have done, I mean, not even since then, that was 2 weeks ago, but, even before that, has just had this sense of stagnancy around it. This, dullness, where the crowds just do not care. This crowd more than any other. There was one really embarrassing moment on this show after Swerve beat Lio Rush. And what was a fun match for as long as it lasted? You knew Lio Rush wasn't going to win. But the match for what it was enjoyable. After the match, Swerve had called out the Hurt Syndicate, and he mistakenly referred to the city as Stamford. And that crowd did not forget. So when MVP started cutting his promo when he came out, they just completely overwrote, and it wasn't even MVP's fault, so he kind of got the brunt of it, which sucked. They just did not give a shit about what he was saying. They just chanted over him the entire time saying, "This is Bridgeport." And then when they proceeded to beat down Swerve and Prince Nana in the ring, they continued to chant, "Bridgeport, Bridgeport." Now, obviously, the fans themselves should have moved on from it. It's not that big of a deal. But it was an embarrassing fucking moment. That was one of the only things they chanted for the entire show was their own fucking city. Everything else on the show, whether it was a match or a promo, this crowd did not care. They were dead silent during the Jon Moxley promo. They were dead silent during a majority of the matches, which were well wrestled. They were well-worked matches, plenty of well-worked matches on this show. I thought the opening match was probably the best part of the entire show, honestly, with Adam Page and Christian Cage beating Juice Robinson and Jay White. But everything else, it was just does this crowd even have a pulse? The Roderick Strong-Lance Archer match, it was a Falls Count Anywhere match. Strong won. Adam Cole lost his match on the show to Konosuke Takeshita. It was a non-title match, the AEW International Champion. And I thought someone would interfere to cost Cole the match. And it was a really good match. Crowd did not give a shit. Takeshita instead just cheated, and that was it for Cole. Cole is not getting his hands on MJF in Full Gear, and honestly, I like that idea more, that we're getting, it's not even a rush into MJF Adam Cole thing. At this point, it's really hard to care, because they butchered that entire feud storyline. It's hard to care, but picking up where they left off with those two, it makes sense to a certain degree, even though the roles are reversed now, but whatever. It makes sense to do this match over MJF and Adam Cole and Roderick Strong. Yes, you could have just done Adam Cole versus MJF straight up, but clearly they're just going to save that for World's End, which is where not where the feud began, but that was when Adam Cole turned on MJF a year ago. It was at that pay-per-view in late December of 2023. So running it back on that show a year later makes sense. You get MJF and Roderick Strong out of the way. But my question is this, and I was thinking about this well before Dynamite on Wednesday. If Roderick Strong also wants to get his hands on MJF, which he does, obviously, the whole point of this, you got to win 3 matches thing was to get their hands on MJF. Okay, whatever. Why wouldn't he have done that when Adam Cole was not there? MJF beat the shit out of Adam Cole back at Double or Nothing. They both returned on that same show, a lot like they both returned at WrestleDream. They both returned on that show. And Cole wasn't cleared to compete at that point, but MJF laid him out, and that seemed to be the end of that whole devil crap, the Undisputed Kingdom devil nonsense. And then they moved on from it before picking up right where they left off just recently on the show, which is fine. But it would have been fine if it was just Cole and MJF straight up. To drag it out anymore, honestly, I know I said it's the 1-year anniversary at World's End of the devil angle and Cole turning on MJF. Who gives a shit? Honestly, at this point, they have been intertwined since the early summer of 2023. Which is when Cole first stated he wanted the championship. They became partners instead. This is a 1.5-year long storyline, and it lost its juice a very long time ago. So to drag it out any further, honestly, who can possibly give a shit? In MJF and Strong, they haven't done that match yet. I'm sure it will be a good match. It'll give MJF a win. Cool. The problem is, though, is that, I was saying a moment ago, why wouldn't he have just gone after MJF when Cole was gone? MJF turned on Cole back at Double or Nothing. Not turned on him, but like he came back and beat up Cole back at Double or Nothing. That is Roderick Strong's friend. I know Roddy was the international champion at that point, or had just lost the championship, or was doing whatever else. I think he had lost the championship on that show to Will Ospreay, I'm pretty sure. It was a Double or Nothing. But like, why wouldn't he have gone after MJF right after that? When Cole was out, Strong was then a heel, and MJF was a babyface. The roles are reversed now, but it's just odd that Strong would all of a sudden be bothered by MJF and want to get his hands on him now, as opposed to 6 months ago, when they've had an issue with him since late last year. That to me just doesn't make any sense. So the Roderick Strong-Lance Archer match was fine. I didn't give a fuck. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, could anyone honestly possibly care? It's impossible to care. But the Konosuke Takeshita match and Adam Cole match, I thought that was good. Another glaring issue with AEW right now is this whole Death Riders hostile takeover of AEW. They were advertising going into Dynamite last night that Jon Moxley would be seizing the Superstation at TBS. What the fuck that even means, I don't know. And he didn't really do anything. Like, they came out, they attacked JD Drake. Again, who gives a shit? Or at least Claudio did. Moxley walked to the ring, did one of his cryptic promos. Orange Cassidy interrupted. They built towards their match at Full Gear, and that was it. The Death Riders have now been around for over 2 months. And we still do not have any sort of explanation for what they're here for, what they're doing, if there's a higher power, why is the belt in a fucking briefcase. I'm sure they'll get around to it at some point, but like what they're giving us in the meantime is not interesting. The Orange Cassidy kind of level up to the main event scene is fine. As long as he's not winning, I don't really need to see Orange Cassidy as the AEW World Champion, at least not at this point. I don't think he's going to beat Moxley anyway. I think it's probably going to be Darby Allin a little bit down the road. Maybe World's End, probably a little bit farther than that. But what they're doing in the meantime with these guys is just not interesting. He's out there cutting the same promos every week. Just a whole lot of just fucking nothing. He's just not saying anything of note or any real interest or significance of any real meaning. They're just promos. Cassidy, I think, is cutting the better promos of the two because he's kind of representing the heart and soul of AEW. He's also been there since day one for the most part. So I kind of like his role in this rivalry a lot more than Moxley's, who it's refreshing to see work as a heel for a change in AEW. But like what they're giving him to work with or what he wants to work with, I'm not really sure what the creative process is there, is not good. It is not interesting. This crowd did not give a shit about what Jon Moxley had to say. And then in the rest of the show, we had a Britt Baker-Penelope Ford match. Fine, but again, who cares? Baker's not remotely as over as she once was. Penelope Ford is already back to being a stepping stone. I kind of figured that even before the feud or during the feud with Jamie Hayter, before that was even over. And now that it's over, I'm even more sure of that than I was before, which is why I did not care about that feud, because I knew it would go right back to Penelope Ford being in the same role that she was in previously. And sure enough, that's exactly what fucking happened. Britt Baker and her had a match. It was competitive. Wasn't interesting. The crowd didn't give a fuck. Britt Baker won, and that was it. Serena Deeb did come out, so they're clearly building to Britt Baker and Serena Deeb 2. They had a match back at the 5-year anniversary episode of Dynamite last month. That was actually a very good match. But I don't know, that's not really interesting to me. And one of the only other highlights on the show is the Kings of the Black Throne beating FTR to qualify for that Fatal 4-Way match at Full Gear, where the AEW World Tag Team titles will be on the line. So they're slowly rebuilding the tag team division. That's also nice to see. It's going to be Private Party, it's going to be the Outrunners, and it's going to be the Kings of the Black Throne. There's also one more contenders match to go. I don't know who the qualifier or what the qualifying match is or who's involved. I forget. But we do know it will be Private Party, the Outrunners as of last Saturday's Collision, and Kings of the Black Throne, which is, Brody King and Malachi Black, representing House of Black as of last night's Dynamite. So they've officially qualified as well. That'll be a fun match, but that was one of the only highlights of Dynamite last night was that qualifying match closing out the show. It was well wrestled and whatnot, but the rest of the show didn't really have a whole lot to get truly invested in. They can have good matches, but we're getting to the point where these crowds don't even care about said matches, because a lot of these matches don't really mean anything. And you can kind of get away with that with Rampage, which who gives a shit about Rampage at this point anyway. Collision, that's a filler show at this point too. But Dynamite is their flagship. At the very least, Dynamite should feel must-see. It should feel like it's worthwhile. It should feel like it's worth watching. Most weeks it's not. I have not caught Dynamite live in a while. I think I watched the New York one live, or close to live, the Grand Slam show in late September. The anniversary show I did watch live, and the Halloween one a couple of weeks ago. Like, those all felt like more special shows. The other average Dynamites do not, whereas at one point they did. And it's at a point now where I don't even really feel like I don't even really feel the urge to attend. Even if it wasn't in a shithole like Bridgeport, if it was at Mohegan Sun or Hartford here in Connecticut, I probably would have gone. But unless the card stands out to me where I know it's going to be not like a massive show, but I watched this show specifically and I say to myself, I missed absolutely nothing. Stuff did happen. It wasn't a completely inconsequential show, but the crowds, and not only just this one in Bridgeport, especially this one, but these crowds do not care for a reason. They need to be given more of a reason to care about the product. There just isn't really a whole lot right now worth watching from week to week in AEW. It's almost becoming a pay-per-view product. You can almost make that argument with NXT back in the day. The weekly NXTs on the network in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, you probably can't name me this one episode of NXT was so amazing. It was a one-and-done show, a one-hour show. The actual shows themselves were enjoyable, but they weren't a lot of the times must-see. I mean, it wasn't even TV. It was on the fucking network. But this is a much bigger deal. This airs on TV. It's a much bigger audience than what NXT had back at that point. I believe so. I could be wrong. I'm not exactly sure. It might be comparable numbers. I don't know. Based on what Dynamite's doing in the ratings right now, and they have been for the last couple of months. But it's a much bigger platform, so it's not even comparable. You need to make these shows worthwhile. You need to give them a reason to want to tune in, care about these shows. And my point was that NXT at that point, again, I know a lot of people back in those days, and it's a completely different product. A lot of people did not watch NXT TV. They would just kind of catch up quickly before the takeovers and watch the takeovers. NXT at that point was largely a takeover-based product. People knew when they tuned into the takeovers, whether they watched NXT TV or not, the takeovers would be entertaining, worthwhile, satisfying, enjoyable, whatever. And they would always be excellent. That's what AEW has kind of become, where the pay-per-views are awesome most of the time, and worthwhile, and worth checking out. Some not so much, but most of them are, to their credit. But the weekly TVs, which should be important in building these shows up and making me want to care about these shows, should be better, and currently it's just not. So AEW has a very big problem on their hands right now with a lot of different things. But the bigger issue is running bigger buildings. Stuff like that is fucking stupid. The fact that AEW was outdrawn by NXT on their own night last week. I know NXT was an ECW arena show, it was a special show, and it wasn't that special. It was a very fun show, but Dynamite really should be beating the competition on their own fucking night. That is also embarrassing. The ratings are lower than they've ever been. The attendance is awful. They've got a very big problem on their hands. It's not a terrible product by any means. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the product is unbearable. Some stuff they do is unbearable. You could say the same thing with WWE, though. It's just that I want to see this company succeed. I want to see the show succeed. I want to feel like I'm missing something by not watching the shows live. I want to feel like I should be watching the shows live. Currently, I don't get that vibe at all. But we know the pay-per-views are going to be great, so I guess that's something to hang your hat on. But the shows do need a lot of work and improvement. But we will get to my full gear predictions next week here on the show. That's going to be next Saturday. And it's just a bummer that Dynamite is so fucking depressing right now. Watching that show on Wednesday was a depressing experience. Or watching it today, rather, on Thursday. I don't watch the shows live. I go do other shit. I don't really feel like I'm missing anything, so I just watch the shows after the fact. It was fucking depressing watching that show. For a show that at one point felt like must-see TV, it was the coolest thing going in wrestling. It's not the weakest show by any means of the week. There's far worse shows I watch in wrestling every week than Dynamite. Rampage and Collision are basically, not bad. They're just completely a waste of time. Dynamite at least has worthwhile stuff on it, but the shows themselves do not feel important, and a lot of the times it's just fucking depressing.